Welcome to Resilience Unravelled. Hi everybody and welcome to Resilience Unravelled, a podcast that examines all aspects of personal and organisational resilience. A huge all-encompassing subject that covers the ability to thrive in life by harnessing your cognitive, emotional, physiological and contextual abilities. I share stories from people who have thrived despite remarkable obstacles, as well as highly successful practitioners and experts across a range of topics. And this podcast introduces their amazing stories and expertise, as well as my own reflections, perspectives, strategies and tips, which come from my own synthesis of themes and trends from wider learning. You can go to qedod.com/extras to access offers, tools and resources, including free articles and ebooks. For those of you that would be interested in supporting our work and contributing more proactively, you can find our new Patreon page at patreon.com. Then search for Resilience Space Unravelled. So, let's get started. Enjoy the show. And so today I'm talking to Tom Simmons about a subject I'm particularly interested in. We've had a number of people in the subject before talking about men's mental health and suicide and anxiety, but particularly relating to men, in fact. And Tom's here to talk about something similar today. And I'm really looking forward to it because I think this is a subject that we under-talk about, and I think it needs more exposure. So I'm delighted to welcome Tom Simmons to Resilience Unravelled today. Hiya, Tom.
Hi, Russell. Hi, Russell. How are you doing?
I'm good. So tell me, how would you describe what it is you do in the world?
What do I do in the world? Professionally, I'm a sales director for an events company that runs events in America. But I guess personally, and I guess what I'm keen to talk about today is this platform I've built called Fellows with Feelings, which is basically something that I felt compelled to provide on the back of my battle with anxiety, depression the last five or 6 years. I felt that when I was in the dark time and that I was for as long as I was, I didn't know where to turn to, who to turn to, and I just felt lost. I really did feel lost, and there wasn't a resource that I found that just helped inspire me to understand what methods and practices were out there that you could potentially employ alongside medication to help make you feel better and get you returning to into better health. So that's really what kind of drove the inspiration behind it, because there was nothing out there, and I felt like there was a big gap to fill.
Very interesting. Arguably, there's never been more help. And it's interesting that you weren't able to access it. So I'm quite interested to sort of unpack that, if you don't mind. So
yeah, sure.
So tell me your story then. So how did you? So you're obviously talking about your own particular situation. So walk me through it from the beginning. How did it all start?
Yeah, sure. So I was. I basically. I guess it's been actually. Present since a very young age. I think it might be worth just giving you the backstory before it then kind of went into kind of diagnosed kind of clinical anxiety depression, because when I was younger I used to get night terrors. I had them from about 7 to 12 years old, which is obviously a huge form of anxiety because I was scared of the night and what was in it and all these different noises that were in the house. And then when I went to school, I was incredibly insecure in the sense of, I was always very conscious about what I wore, what I said, the people I was with. Every thing in my environment, I really hone in on into kind of an obsessive level. And then I went to university and took up some very unhealthy habits. Probably partied more than I should have done, and.
Good.
And yeah, I know, and I guess that's very typical of that kind of age. And I know a lot of people can tolerate it and they're fine, but in my case, I probably took it a bit too far, and I ended up giving myself 2 significant health scares. One came in the form of atrial fibrillation when I was 20, which is basically a heart arrhythmia, which is obviously more common with people who are much older. And then a couple of months later, I got diagnosed with cancer. So I got like a double health whammy, which was which hit me hard, because when you're 20, you think you're invincible, you think you're unstoppable, and suddenly you're faced with this new reality that you've got these two health scares and everything flips on its head. So that's when the anxiety and the mental health came about.
Yeah. And that's, you would imagine, is a normal reaction.
Exactly. And I think they both, particularly the heart rhythmia, really, the emotion that came on the back of that, I think, was that all that internal insecurity that I've been building up throughout my childhood, I think just provided this huge outlet where that heart rhythmia came, and then my health was compromised, and suddenly I just became an anxious wreck. I developed extreme health anxiety. I was having daily panic attacks, very irritable, chest tightness, wasn't sleeping properly. You name it, I was going through it. So it's pretty grim.
So how did people help you when you were a child? What was the what seemed to be the approach when you were younger to all of this, the night terrors and such like? How did you find that?
Well, I spent half the time in my parents' bed, which they must have been so annoyed about. And they probably gave me more time than they should have done. They should have just kicked me out the door, but they were too kind. Because and I think it was partly separation anxiety. I think I just wanted that security, and I don't know. It's weird because I did speak to someone the other day, and they asked a similar question, and I do find it interesting because my mum seems to think it's separation anxiety, but I was just I just had this irrational narrative going round and round in my head that was provoked by the fear of the dark and these noises that I thought were burglars and all just irrational stuff, which I guess, a lot of anxiety is irrational. It's fear of the unknown and, dramatizing all these situations, which is, the reality is if you did have the rational head on and you didn't have that anxiety, you just wouldn't think twice about it. But that's the frustrating thing about anxiety. So it's a difficult one, Russell. I think it probably was a culmination of a few things, but
how were you helped? Because actually one of the criticisms is that people get on a fast track to become, how can I describe it without being implicitly incorrect? It's that they become professionally hooked into a service where, you become almost on a treadmill of a particular type of mental, medical and social care.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if you went through that, went through the whole of the NHS mental health provision, or did you avoid all that?
I did, particularly at my younger age, because I think it could just be me growing up and trying to get my head around life. I think that can be quite common. But I guess towards my later ages, when I hit university, that definitely became more of a topic. The thing was, though, is I was very mindful of the stigma when you do therapy and antidepressants. There is definitely a stigma with that. I know it's a lot better now, but I did everything I could initially to try and help myself before going down that route. And with hindsight, I would have gone about it a lot differently and would have just dismissed the stigma and just thought about my health. But that was my approach initially, anyway.
Okay. And so you reached the stage where you were facing the twin perils of heart condition, effectively, and a cancer diagnosis. I'm guessing that you found help and treatment for those things.
Yeah,
that's a sort of ready source. I mean, I've had cancer, and you there's a lot of help. There's a lot of help available. There's a lot of support. It's almost like, yes, we know that one. Here's the track. Bosh, off you go.
Yeah.
And then I'm guessing the same with the arrhythmia as well, as some similar sort of thing. Oh, yes, that's something we can actually give you or cut out or massage away or whatever it might be. Those sorts of physical therapy, those sort of physical treatments seem to be fine, don't they? I mean, I guess, they're not fine, they're not great to go through, but I'm hoping you found that there was a course of treatment available to you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And funny you mentioned that, because if I had to pick going through the anxiety in the way I did versus the cancer, I'd pick the cancer every time, because for what you mentioned there, it's tangible, it's physical. It's like, right, I've got this diagnosis and there's this treatment which will then cure, and you can kind of see the cure, right? With mental health, it's so complex and nuanced. There isn't necessarily a cure.
and so we start with this main problem, which is a self-diagnosis, really, isn't it? So you rock up to the doctors, you say, hey, this is what I'm going through, and they say, okay, let me open my textbook.
Mhm.
And they blow the cobwebs off it in many cases, don't they? And,
Yeah, yeah.
and they say, we've got a pill for that. Was that your experience, or did that again? Am I over characterizing it?
Well, I mean, it was latterly because I kind of had no other option. It was about 15, 16 months ago where I just fell into full blown depression. And we sat down as a family thinking, like, what choice do we have? And I ended up taking sertraline, which has been great. It has been great. But I just, I just wanted to do everything I could to avoid that route, because I do feel like, through what I've learned now, I do feel like mental health, well, my view is it's basically it's an imbalance of your lifestyle. You know, in my case, I was drinking too much, living too hedonistically, just taking life for granted. And I can look back, and there's definitely things I was doing that weren't conducive to a healthy mindset, or definitely not setting me up for a healthy mindset. And I definitely think now that, whilst antidepressants and those types of drugs can be great for so many people, don't get me wrong, I do feel like it kind of cheats people actually having to make a lifestyle change. I do think people try and avoid or do everything they can to take the easy option so that they can live their lifestyle like they were before, right? And clearly, I think in most cases, I can't say it's for everyone, but clearly whatever they're doing isn't working for their health, because mental health is inflammation of the body but in the brain, right? So yeah, so that was my view.
It's
Yeah.
interesting the way you described it. You almost described it as a punishment for a hedonistic lifestyle, or are you saying it was just an inevitable outcome for you?
Well, yeah, I probably would put it as a punishment. I was taking life for granted. And I think that about my cancer. Whenever I mention my cancer to people, it's that whenever you mention that C word, people they kind of seize up and, oh my God, and I don't ever expect sympathy, because I take the view that, we always talk about metabolism in the sense of digesting food properly, but I think you can metabolize experiences. And I was metabolizing the wrong experiences, which was obviously going to give me the poor health outcomes. And I was playing with fire, and unfortunately, I got it wrong, and whatever outer being or whatever it was that that kind of sparked the growth for the cancer or the problem for the heart. Didn't like what I was getting up to. So I do. Funnily enough, Ross, I do see it as a punishment, which I guess is probably a bit of a weird thing, but
yes. Well, it's a thing. It's up to you whether you decide to say it as weird or not. So, so what sources of help did you find which were about at that time when you started looking around?
So I started looking at, I guess, more holistic ways of helping improve my mental health. So I've now do a lot of breath work, which I guess I know throws a lot of people, because it's like, what? We breathe anyway. How can breath work help? But the last 15 months, that's been a huge part of my life. Changing my diet has been massive.
Good.
What else? Prioritizing my sleep and coming up with new ways that I can approach making sure I get better sleep. Exercise. It's all the classic things we hear all the time. But it's just prioritizing them. I think before they were just kind of second priority, and now it's kind of forefront of mind. And I made significant sacrifice and significant compromise on a number of things. I gave up drinking, so I've been sober now 15 months. And I just kind of thought, I'm going to throw everything at it. I literally thought I'm going to do everything I can to try and make as much progress as I can. And it's been I've seen a huge lifestyle change, and I've seen a huge change in myself and all sorts of areas. It's been very interesting in all sorts of ways.
Yes. And interesting. So you obviously want to talk about the fact that it's sort of different for guys. And I agree with you, but not everybody would. So tell me about that.
Well, I think it's fair to say women, they find it easier to be more open about their feelings. I think that's a fairly reasonable thing to say. I think with men, it's more about sport and chewing the fat over a couple of pints and kind of avoiding all the feeling stuff because it's kind of seen as a weakness. It's kind of seen as a bit wet. It's not cool. You don't talk about feelings within men, and I think that's a real shame and clearly causing a lot of issue because a lot of men below 40 are dying from suicide, and you can only assume that a lot of that must be because they don't feel like they can talk about, when they're stressed with work or family pressures or whatever it might be, they don't have an outlet. It's
Yes.
not like, I think particularly with older generations as well, I think my age group, so younger generations are kind of waking up to that and realizing that that's got to change. But I think anything over 35, 40, it's problematic. I think it's really problematic. So it's that man up, grow some balls, all these classic kind of phrases that we hear. And I went to an all boys school growing up, and it was very very prevalent then, and it definitely helped with character building. But I'm sure there was a lot of boys around me that really struggled with that because they just weren't that way inclined. So yeah.
And you're saying it's okay for guys to have those conversations?
Yeah, I think it should be. Yeah, I think men should feel okay to cry. Men should feel okay to talk openly about their feel. They should. I think that should be a normal. I think we should be proud to be in touch with our feminine side. I think being emotional and just being vulnerable around how we feel, I think is really healthy. I really think that's healthy. Other men might disagree, but I know from setting up this page that I have on Instagram and speaking to as many men that I do, I always get comments and feedback stating just how refreshing it is. And I see there's all sorts of accounts popping up as well that are similar to mine. And I think it's brilliant. The more men that do speak out and do try and normalize the mental health subject within the male domain, I think is such a great and refreshing thing.
Yes. But it's also important, I think, not to over-genderize or stereotype some of those things, isn't it? Because actually it's not about your feminine side, or, because you're characterizing it that way, because you're getting into a whole gender debate, which is very confusing these days. But what you're saying actually is okay for guys to talk about feelings, okay for guys to cry if they need to. It's okay for guys to emote and to express themselves appropriately. And it's been my experience over my life as a therapist and such like that. Guys are great at talking about feelings, great talking about emotions, but you have to get them into the context, the right place, which is different to the way some, for example, women communicate. And I think that's part of the issue, isn't it? It's I remember talking to Frank Rich, who's a very famous suicide practitioner over in the States, and he said if you want to get two guys to talk about anything to do with feelings, just make sure they don't look at each other and they have no problems. And it's an interesting characteristic if you ever see that working. If you see a man and a woman talking together, if you don't look at each other, men can talk about it, women can't. Sorry, men can talk then, but it affects women negatively. So it's quite an interesting context, isn't it, about it's not that we have a problem doing it. It might be the context of the way we talk about feelings and emotions. Maybe that feminine word is part of the issue. I don't know. What do you think?
It's interesting, isn't it? It is interesting. I think clearly there's exceptions to the cause, but I just can't help but think it is something a lot of men struggle with. And I just think I think a lot of it is down to upbringing. So I do think, the much older generations have instilled that into them. And, I do think it's that culture of, just get on with it. Just get on with it is what I always used to hear that whenever I'd kind of make a plea or make a hint towards that I was struggling. It was kind of, look, Tom, come on, it's nothing. Just get on with it. And
that's significant, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's not a gender thing. That's
No.
that's an instructional thing, isn't it? And whether I've worked with some incredibly aggressive female bosses who would say those sorts of things. They would say, man up, grow a pair, sort yourself out. And they'd be saying that to women as well as men, ironically, because it's a sort of style of management or a style of looking at the world where you fear weakness in other people, isn't it? Because they would have to deal with it. And that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you've obviously come across that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I come across there's definitely a lot of judgment rather than compassion, which is a shame. I think it's changing, but a lot of I've definitely, I don't know if you've seen myself on Instagram, but it is pretty out there stuff. I'm really putting myself vulnerable, and when I try and talk about it in social situations or general situations, I do get a feeling of judgment, and I don't know whether that's a British thing or because we're quite prude in nature, and it's kind of not frowned upon to speak about feelings, but it's that sense of where you're just burdening someone, and people, it's kind of that taboo topic. Whereas I've spoken to other people in some European countries, and it definitely seems to they definitely seem to have a more compassionate attitude towards it, and that's really what I think underpins it all, is people taking interest in caring for people that are making hints for help or pleas for help, rather than that get on with it or man up culture. That kind of man up approach is very much kind of dismissive and judgmental, and I think that's got to change.
Yes. Is it also true to say along with compassion should come empathy, though? Because
absolutely.
Yeah. So I think those two things are the sort of critical bit of resilience. And you have to have compassion, empathy for yourself, but also for other people. And there is a place for man up. Sometimes it is about getting through. Sometimes you just have to get through, but recognizing that there has to be the down curve that comes after that, where the repair and renewal comes from. And there are some people who need to hear man up, because that's either because of conditioning or whatever it might be, but because that's what's needed at that moment in time. And so sometimes we have to have the empathy to deploy what's necessary for that person, but not what works for us. And I think that's one of the challenges with this more compassionate modern approach, isn't it? We tend to use the approach that works for us. And if we're more talky, feelingsy, such like, but we're dealing with someone who's much more rational, then you have to approach it from their perspective. Otherwise you're actually exacerbating the problem which already exists in a funny sort of way.
Yeah, right. I think your point about rationality is important, because I do think there's probably, there are situations where people, get thrust into them and it's clearly not right for them, and there can be maybe an argument for character building. But I think to counter argue, to play devil's advocate to that, then there's clearly some people that aren't conducive to those types of environments. So is it necessary that they should be in them in the first place? I don't know. So,
but now we're violently agreeing, because character building is great, but it's building. You can't graft character onto people, can you? No. You have to learn it. But the thing is, you learn character through failing, learning, and coming back, bouncing forward. Not bouncing backward. That old idea.
Well, exactly. And I think your point about the compassionate and the empathy coming into that, not just saying man up to character build, to then not try and understand how that experience helped that individual. I think there's got to be, and I guess we're now making it quite complicated than it shouldn't be, but I think I do think there is a point about the tone of how you position that man up, in terms of, I don't know, it should have an empathetic, compassionate undertone, whether it's afterwards or before. I do think there's still does that make sense? I don't know.
It makes total sense. I mean, we work in resilience, but we also work in leadership, and we advocate a style of tough love leadership, which is sometimes you need to be tough, and that's about accountability. But you have to do the other side as well. And you'll know, if you've been in sales, that one of the key things you have to do is you have to put yourself in your customer's shoes in order to be able to build a relationship and build a sale. And it's the same skill for me in understanding other people. And the question which we frequently do not ask, which is, what can I do to help, often falls on the ears of people who don't know how to help themselves. And there comes the challenge. And therefore, some people who also don't have a skill set say things, the only thing they can say, which is what worked for them, which was, well, man up. And I often think the challenge here is we're teaching people to know what not to do, but we're really not being very clear in teaching people how to know what to do. We have the same thing in business at the moment, where we have an organization that goes around showing people that everything in life is a mental health issue, but not everything in life is a mental health issue. Sometimes they're just things. And we need to learn skills and processes to help us. And if you want to genderize it, that's a very male approach to what we're talking about is a very male problem, which then men can engage with and say, right. If I'm a person that likes a toolkit, where's my toolkit?
Yeah.
And if my toolkit is talking about my feelings, then that's great. Okay, so show me how that works. Well, how do I start? When do I do it? You know, if you're going to talk about that rationale approach, then we've got something that men can practically engage with to say, right. I mean, what I'm really impressed about is your breathing thing. People underestimate the actual power of diaphragmatic breathing, particularly in
Correct.
anxiety, don't they? And we call it we'd wrap mindfulness and meditation and all that old blah around it. But at the heart of it is exactly what you've said: is rationality and breathing.
Mm, yeah, exactly. But I think those things need to be. Those are definitely important. But I think some other things that I've learned that underpin all of that is making sure that you're consistent, you're disciplined, you're curious, and you have an open mind. I think those are four kind of key traits that I think underpin any endeavor. Because if you don't have an open mind, you then won't be that receptive to change. In my case, for a long time, I was very stubborn, and it took me a while to cultivate a mindset where I was a lot more inquisitive and a lot more curious about things that I would have otherwise dismissed and just wouldn't have entertained was a legitimate choice that I could pursue that would help me.
I'm really pleased you said that. I mean, they often talk about the 4 C's of resilience. One, which is compassion, you've talked about, and the other thing you just talked about, beginning with C.
Yeah.
Then we've only got the other 2 to go. Which should be memory, cognition. I think you're spot on. So how's your journey going for you now then? So you're setting up these pages. Tell me how people can access these experiences that you're having, so they can begin to hook
my
in
main
with
one's
you.
Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah, Instagram is my main one. That's where I'm putting up a lot of videos, a lot of static content. I'm adding to my story every day. It's really a daily, almost like a vlog of what I'm getting up to, but also being as vulnerable as I can around when I was in a bad way, how that felt, and trying to be as animated and as descriptive as I can with that, because clearly since doing it, people seem to resonate a lot with it. And I do think it's helping a lot of people, and it's creating kind of a safe and secure place for us all to talk about mental health without being judged. And I do think that's still that's still early days. I do think the whole mental health topic is really moving forward, but I still think it's early days, and having these pages, whether it's mine or whether it's anyone else, that they can feel comfortable talking about their experiences as well.
Brilliant. Okay, so walk us through how we find you then on Instagram.
So it's I think let me just double check. I think it's
Fellas with feelings.
Yeah, but I think it might be. I don't know whether it is fellas with feelings, but I don't know whether it's the underscore.
It is. It's fellas underscore.
Yeah, there
with,
you go.
Yeah,
right. Okay, you know better than
I
me.
know. Goodness, I should be your publicist. Fellas underscore with underscore feelings at Instagram, and of course people can sometimes find you under your name Tom Simmons as well, which is great. And there's a ton of really useful stuff on. You're right. You do talk a lot about this, and I think what's lovely, well, actually not lovely, it's inspirational what you're doing, is you're sort of leading the way. I think there's nothing better than setting an example for someone.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, I hope it is helping. I'm just trying to be as candid and as raw about it as I can, because I think, with social media in general, there's a lot of people showcasing this superficial lifestyle to kind of validate themselves in some ways. And actually, I think we need to see a growing number of accounts that just showcase the reality. Life in general isn't great. And I think social media hides all of that. And it's really sad. So I'm trying to do away with that and just show people what it's like, what the reality looks like, rather than just showing my holiday snaps or me topless or whatever it might be, Not that that's a good image, but
I've got to live with that for the rest of the day. No, you're right. I think it's the most inauthentic media in which to be authentic on, and so you probably stand out by being true to yourself and such like. I think that's great.
Yeah.
So, last question: how are you doing?
I'm good. I am good, actually. I'm a lot better than I was. It was 15 months ago when it really got bad, and then I made all sorts of changes which have really helped me out. So it's still I'm still on the course, but before I couldn't see the horizon, and now I can. So that's quite a nice thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's that thing about knowing where you're going is half the battle, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Sense of purpose. Tom, it's been fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing your resource, your vulnerability, your experience, and some really interesting ways of thinking about things. And, thanks so much for your time.
No worries. Good to speak, Russell.
You take care. Hi, everybody. I hope you found that episode useful and interesting. Feedback is always welcomed, and if you are in the mood to subscribe to us or even leave a comment on iTunes or Stitcher, that would be amazing. If you want to suggest ideas or even people you would like me to interview, then reach out to us at qedod.com/contact. As I said earlier, you can go to qedod.com/podcasts for show notes or follow the links. And you can go to qedod.com/extras to access offers, tools and resources, including free articles and ebooks. For those of you that would be interested in supporting our work and contributing more proactively, you can find our new Patreon page at patreon.com. Then search for Resilience Unravelled. I look forward to being in your ear next time around. Take care.